World leaders have responded with a wide range of reactions after U.S. forces struck 3 Iranian nuclear sites on Sunday. The developments have triggered urgent global calls for de-escalation, with some nations strongly condemning the attack, while others praised it. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu congratulated U.S. President Donald Trump in a video message. He called the decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities a bold one and said it would change history.
Congratulations, President Trump. Your bold decision to target Iran's nuclear facilities with the awesome and righteous might of the United States will change history.
Netanyahu said history would record that President Trump acted to deny the world's most dangerous regime the world's most dangerous weapons. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi called the U.S. strikes a grave violation of the UN Charter, international law, and the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In a statement on X, he described the events as outrageous with everlasting consequences. Araghchi emphasized that every UN member should be alarmed and said Iran reserves all options to defend its sovereignty under the UN Charter's provisions on self-defense. UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres said he was gravely alarmed by the use of force by the U.S. He called the attack a dangerous escalation and a direct threat to international peace and security. Guterres warned of the growing risk of the conflict spiraling out of control and said the only viable path forward was diplomacy. There is no military solution. The only hope is peace, he said. Pakistan reacted by stating that dialogue and diplomacy, in line with the UN Charter, remain the only viable solution. The Foreign Office emphasized the need to protect civilian lives and property and called for an immediate end to the conflict. It urged all parties to adhere to international humanitarian law. Oman, which has acted as a mediator in nuclear talks between Washington and Tehran, condemned the strikes and called them an unlawful act of aggression. According to the Oman news agency, the Foreign Ministry warned that the U.S. action risked widening the conflict and violated international law. It highlighted that targeting nuclear facilities, prohibited under the Geneva Conventions due to the risk of radioactive contamination, further breached global norms. Saudi Arabia voiced deep concern over the U.S. airstrikes. In a statement posted on X, the Saudi Foreign Ministry called for restraint, de-escalation, and urged the international community to intensify efforts to reach a political solution during this highly sensitive period. Iraq condemned the targeting of nuclear facilities and said the attack threatened peace and stability in the Middle East. Government spokesperson Bassem Al-Awadi described the military escalation as a grave threat to regional stability. Qatar, which hosts the largest U.S. military base in the Middle East, warned of catastrophic consequences. Its foreign ministry called on all parties to act with wisdom and restraint and to avoid further escalation. The United Arab Emirates also called for an immediate halt to the escalation. The UAE Foreign Ministry warned that further action could lead to new levels of instability in the region. British Prime Minister Keir Starmer described Iran's nuclear program as a grave threat to international security. He said Iran must never be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon and supported the U.S. action. He called on Iran to return to the negotiating table and reach a diplomatic solution.
Well, we've long had concerns about the Iranian nuclear program and been very clear that Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. The US has now taken action to alleviate that threat. It is important that we now de-escalate the situation, stabilise the region, and get the parties back around the table to negotiate. And I've been speaking with international leaders this morning to that end. So I want to reassure the British public that we're doing everything we can to stabilise the situation, to de-escalate the situation, and to get to a negotiated outcome. But I'm very clear in my own mind that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. That is the greatest threat to stability in the region. Well, my focus is on de-escalating the situation. I accept your challenge that there is a risk of escalation. That's a risk to the region, it's a risk beyond the region, and that's why all our focus has been on de-escalating, getting people back around to negotiate what is a very real threat in relation to the nuclear programme. In relation to the UK, we were not involved in the attack. We were given due notice, as we would expect as close allies to the US, and we have been moving assets to the region to make sure that we're in a position to protect our own interests, our personnel and our assets, and of course those of our allies. Well, it's clearly a fast-moving situation, and there's been a huge amount of discussions in the days since the G7 ended, and the US has now taken the action to alleviate the threat that Iran's nuclear program poses. My position throughout has been as calling for de-escalation, to get people around the table to negotiate a better outcome diplomatically. And I've been talking to international leaders in recent days, but particularly intensely this morning. We'll continue to do so during the course of today.
The European Union's top diplomat Kaja Kallas echoed calls for diplomacy. She urged all sides to step back and return to talks. She stated that Iran must not be allowed to develop a nuclear weapon and that EU foreign ministers would discuss the situation soon. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, through his spokesman, called for Iran to immediately resume negotiations with the US and Israel. The German government stated that it believed large parts of Iran's nuclear program were damaged in the airstrikes. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba called for a quick de-escalation of the conflict. He said Japan was monitoring the situation closely with grave concern. Italy's Foreign Minister Antonio Tajani said he hoped the attack, which caused massive damage, would be followed by de-escalation and that Iran would return to the negotiating table. New Zealand's Foreign Minister Winston Peters expressed deep concern. He said ongoing military action in the Middle East was extremely worrying and emphasized the need to avoid further escalation. Peters said New Zealand strongly supports diplomatic efforts and called for a return to talks. Australia called Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile program a threat to international peace. In a statement, it noted President Trump's remarks that now is the time for peace. The Australian government called for de-escalation, dialogue, and diplomacy. Mexico issued a call for diplomatic dialogue and peace between the parties involved. Citing its pacifist foreign policy stance, the foreign ministry stressed the urgency of de-escalating tensions and restoring peaceful coexistence. Venezuelan Foreign Minister Ivan Gil condemned what he called U.S. military aggression. He demanded an immediate cessation of hostilities and blamed the U.S. bombing, carried out at Israel's request, for striking Iranian nuclear complexes including Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Cuban President Miguel Díaz-Canel also condemned the U.S. bombing. He said it was a dangerous escalation that violated the UN Charter and international law, warning it plunged humanity into a crisis with irreversible consequences. Meanwhile, India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi spoke with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. Modi expressed deep concern over the developments and reiterated the need for immediate de-escalation, dialogue, and diplomacy to restore regional peace and security.